Hey everybody, it's Ingrid. Welcome to the Creative Grove and the new Craft Stash hop. This is just a fun hop. It's just for fun. A bunch of friends and we just thought we would hop along for several days and create projects that we love. Today I'm doing a scenic card, and this is me with Misty Morning Daybreak. This is just me envisioning walking through the woods and the sun breaking through the fog. We have some great sponsors and some awesome prizes. And the whole purpose behind the hop was really to use something new, or maybe it was something that you had that was sitting in a drawer that's new to you. So why don't we get started? I'm going to use some Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and you can see here I'm just inking up this beautiful stamp. This is actually a stamp that I've had for a long time, but it's the first time I've ever using it. So this is my new for this hop. It's been sitting in a drawer and it was time to break it out. This was a new release from Stampscapes about a year ago. And I'm kind of envisioning that the sunbeams are going across. You can see that I didn't actually stamp that yet. I was just kind of positioning it on my Misty and trying to envision where those beams were coming across. And I was kind of using those branches that were coming out from the side as a guide for where to kind of envision those beams coming down at an angle. So I've got two distinct ones that I'm taking a little bit of ink away from, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that down. I'm not pressing too hard. I wanted to kind of see what was happening. Doing it a second time, going a little bit harder, and I'm going to remove just a little bit more from the bottom. Now it's already stamped it, but I thought that maybe I could just take a little teeny tiny bit for a third beam, just to make sure that when I stamped it again, that part didn't stamp, so it maybe gave it a little bit more light. And it's stamped absolutely beautifully. I use the Unmounted Stamps from Stampscapes. You can see that I trim mine down. They actually come with a lot more rubber. I take the time to do that when I first get them so that I can do things like this. Just kind of push that one trunk off a little bit more to the right. And I also don't, I'm always worried about getting those extra spaces inked up. That's partly why I trim up my stamps. I love that you can get unmounted stamps. I actually use Aleene's Tack It Over and Over on the back to give them a temporary adhesive. It makes them sticky so that I can use things like the Misty or blocks. It makes it very easy to do. Now you can see I'm inking up those two tree trunks that are on the left. I just wanted to make sure that those are darker than the other four because those light beams are going to be coming from behind those, so they are actually in the shadow. So I needed those to be fully inked up. So now I'm going to add a little bit of interest in the background. I'm going to use Blackjack by Catherine Pooler. This is a phenomenal ink. I love Catherine Pooler ink, and it's great for actually doing Stampscape scenes. So I have this leafless limb tree, and I have it in a couple sizes. The smaller size is actually new to me, never have been used before. So that's another one to continue with our little theme. And you can see I just tore a paper towel just straight down so that I had a nice straight edge. This is a great way to layer your Stampscape stamps versus using regular paper. It's a little thinner, gives you a little bit more play. And you can see that I stamped that off several times. I even removed a little bit where I thought some of the light beams were going to be, but I was stamping it so lightly, stamped 4 times off, that it really didn't matter. It was really just that little something in the background, way behind the fog. And then here I'm stamping the large tree trunk. To me, this is like a fallen sequoia or redwood tree, and just want to get that. That's going to be part of my foreground, so that's a very large piece. And then we're going to work on coloring that later. Now I need to use some grays. You can see I have several grays from different brands. Weathered Wood is that one right there. And Weathered Wood, the thing that's different about Weathered Wood versus some of my other grays, you can see there's the Marvy pad that's discontinued, but it's such a phenomenal ink. Very, very thin. The Weathered Wood has a slight blue undertone, but for what I need right now, I need something that's really, really light. I need to get the London Fog Memento ink. That is one pad that I don't have in my collection that I definitely need. I need to expand some of my grays a little bit and get some lighter shades. Something that's very translucent. And I'm kind of going in between the beams now and just very, very lightly tapping off. You can see I'm tapping onto my scrap paper a little bit. Actually, that one I went direct to my paper, which I shouldn't have done. Better to build up. You can always build up, but it's a lot harder to take away. So, here I'm using the Color Box Stylus tool with the sponge tip applicators, and I'm very lightly just building up a little bit of ink in the direction of where my light source is. So this is the in-between light that you're seeing, the darker in between the beams of light that are gonna, you know, shine through. Now I'm going to use just a piece of copy paper, and this is just going to help me to kind of cover up where those beams are going to be, and kind of, I don't want to get such a hard edge with the grays. Now here you can see I'm actually drawing where my light source is. So I'm envisioning that this is going to be my light source, and I'm going to position my card. I'm going to actually draw 4 corners with just a pencil on my piece of scrap paper here, just so that I can reposition my card as I need to throughout this project. This is actually a very helpful little thing to do. You know, it's very simple. I'm not attaching my card at this time because, you know, I'm going to be moving it around. That's just the way I work. I like to move my piece around versus leaving it stationary in one spot. And you can see here, I don't really want to get too much of a hard edge, so I'm just kind of using that just to kind of remind me that that is where the light beam is going to be, because I don't really want to build up gray there. I want the gray to be in between. So that's kind of helping me. I may hit some of those edges, but I'm going to work more gray over that so that it's not too harsh, you know, of a line, because that's really not the look that I'm going for. So I just want to gradually build this up. And like I had said earlier, Kevin had actually done a project very, very similar to this. This is really kind of a case of one of his projects, just altering it a little bit. And that's what I love about a lot of the things that he does. He has so many videos. He has over 300 on his YouTube channel. I will definitely link it below. Make sure that you check out a lot of his videos. They're very educational. He does them real time, which is great, so you can stamp right along with him. And he's actually one of the sponsors for the hop. We have some great prizes. We have 6 prizes for the 3 days of the hops, and several people along the way are also going to give away prizes. I have a prize that I'm giving away on my blog, as well as it's a prize pack of a variety of products, as well as several of my friends are also giving away some prizes. And then we have the 6 prizes along the way. So make sure you leave a comment on everybody's blog. That's part of the rules. You gotta kind of see what everybody's doing along the way. So if you haven't been to the actual blog to see the hop, make sure you click it in the link below. So I'm going to speed this up quite a bit, because it's otherwise just going to take a little bit too long. And you can see that I'm deepening those gray shadows in between the rays of sunlight, and just kind of envisioning where some of those other beams are, working on that bottom 3rd beam. And I actually work in one at the top, and I'm gonna start to work between the weathered wood, and I'm gonna actually move on to Hickory Smoke, which is a much darker gray, just to kind of bring a little bit more depth into the scene. And really looking, I'm looking at my card right now, and I think I probably could have even gone a little darker than you're seeing here, but you can see those beams are starting to kind of take shape a little bit. So now we're going to actually work in a little bit of the gray onto the actual trunks themselves. I'm starting off with the darker of the 2 here. And you can see I have my stylus tool completely on an angle, so I'm using the very, very left side of it, keeping the right side completely up, because I don't want to get that shape. But what I'm really trying to do is I'm just really trying to create that shadow on the farthest side of the tree trunk. Now right now, those 2 tree trunks, the entire trunk can be completely dark. But when you see me move this over to the other trees, I'm really kind of hitting that spot that is opposite of where the light source is coming from. And that would be where the shadow is. And what I'm going to do in this project is I'm going to continue to deepen this, and I'm going to speed this up quite a bit, because you just don't need to see me do this repetitively. You get the gist. So that's why you're going to have little spots that are regular full speed, 100%, and then you're going to have parts that are sped up. I hope that's okay. And so now that I'm deepening those, I'm going to do it with several of the grays, and I'm even bringing in a little bit of black towards the end, and we will bring in a little bit of green for some moss as well, and a little bit of brown too, actually. So I'm going to speed this up now. So once we've deepened up our trunks enough, we're going to move actually onto the forest ground right there. And my light source is obviously coming from the left upper left corner. So we're going to imagine that the shadows of the trunks are going to be going, you know, kind of downward slope to the right. And that is really going to help give this scene a little bit more of a realistic look. So I'm going to have the trunks have a shadow themselves, especially that one right there. That's going to be a deep shadow. And then I'm also going to use my inks, you know, throughout the project to deepen the in-between spaces, you know, the crevices between the trunks as well. And kind of going along that big, huge trunk in the foreground too. We're going to actually fill in quite a bit of this scene with just some little stamps and just lots of ink, different colors. We're still using the weathered wood, so what you're seeing right now is my lightest shade of gray just kind of built up with constantly lightly tapping. I'm not tapping very hard when I'm adding it because I want to build up, kind of like diffusing that gray out a little bit and just working it layer after layer after layer. That's really, you know, how I'm building the depth in the color in the scene. So now that we have that kind of built up, we're going to work now with the Hickory Smoke, which is a much darker shade of gray. It's not quite as dark as, say, Blackjack by Catherine Pooler or actually the Gray by Marvy, but it's a very pretty shade. I really love using it. I use it a lot, actually. It's a great distress ink, and it does actually stay rather wet for a little bit on the glossy cardstock I found. I found that distress inks work really well when doing these scenes, as do Catherine Pooler inks. Those two are my go-to inks when I'm creating scenery. So you can see here it's just really building a lot of depth, and I'm just going over those same spots before moving on to the next step. So now that we've worked in our grays, we're going to start with a little bit of brown. I've got Catherine Pooler icing on the cake, and I ended up not using Adirondack Lights Pebble, which is a retired ink pad. Catherine Pooler ink, the icing on the cake, is actually the perfect shade for tree trunks. You really can't find a better shade, and the ink is phenomenal on the glossy paper. I love to work with it. So I'm just continuing like I did with the gray, really working, you can see on that right side of the tree trunk and also on the forest floor a little bit here, kind of accentuating those shadows a little bit more with the icing on the cake, which is dark brown. And I'm just going to continue to do that, and then from here I'm going to actually work in a little bit of green. We're adding a little bit of brown to our big tree trunk, our fallen sequoia or redwood there. I actually left it just brown and I just used brown and black on that. I didn't use much else. So from here we're going to switch over to a distress ink, which is peeled paint. Love this color, my favorite green to use from the distress line, and it's perfect for the forest. You know, we're going to add some moss now. The name of this stamp is actually Mossy Tree Trunks. So peeled paint is the absolute perfect shade for this. I think it's even the one that Kevin used in his video. But you can see we're just really adding it to the floor there. Again, working layer on layer to help build up, you know, the depth there. And you can see that the trunks of the trees are actually becoming a little bit more pronounced now. Before, you know, the image just kind of halted abruptly and there was a lot of white there, but we've been building on that, and we're kind of making those bigger, and I'm kind of having them work out on a triangle, kind of extending from, you know, where the base of that stamp is, and that just helps to give the illusion, you know, that they're really kind of embedded into the forest floor there. And we're just going to continue to add some of that. I'm not adding too much green to where the light beams are because I don't want it to feel awkward. So just really kind of keeping that to the actual trunks of the trees. So now I've sped this up really, really fast, and I apologize about that, but you've seen me do this. I'm just going to continue to layer here, and I'm layering peeled paint. I'm going to go back to Hickory Smoke and even come back in with some of the weathered wood, and just really kind of building those layers, the far side, the darker, you know, shadows on the trunks, as well as the in-between, the sun rays as well. And I'm doing that with both the Hickory Smoke and also the weathered wood, which I'm going to be using in a second. And then I'm even bringing in at the very end, adding a different element of brown. I'm going to bring in an Adirondack Lights espresso pad, which is also a discontinued ink pad, but you know, hey, I still own it, so why not use it? You know, there's so many browns out there on the market. Distress has so many. I think I have like 8 different brown shades of brown by them. Can't have enough of those. They're all very, very unique to themselves. So just kind of really building the depth here. And like I said, I really condensed this. I think I have about 16 minutes worth of layering brought down to a little over a minute for you. But I wanted you to be able to see actually what I'm doing, you know, even though you don't really need the real time here, before moving on to our next step. And there's the espresso, just kind of really, you know, bringing that trunk in the foreground a little bit more to life, adding a little warmth to the scene. So now that we've kind of built up a lot of the depth within the scene, we're going to add a little bit more fresh stamping to this. And I wanted to kind of hold off, you know, while we're adding all those layers. So this is like really dark here towards the end. And we're using some little bare branches, and these are winter brush or winter bush and winter twigs, and I'm even going to bring in 3 bare trees, which is a larger stamp. And you can see I'm kind of masking off the larger trunk there. We're going to end up stamping over it, which actually in hindsight I wish I hadn't done, but that's okay. So here we're just kind of adding different images here, and these are just kind of coming out from behind that foreground piece that we have, which kind of helps ground the scene. And you can see they're really deep and black, which is exactly what I'm going for here. Adding a little bit to there. I'm going to mask a little. I'm going to switch off and add now the winter twigs, which is a smaller one. Just adding them onto my Catherine Pooler blocks there. I love these blocks. If you don't have these blocks, you have got to get them. They're so lightweight. They're easy to hold. And they're perfect for all your stamps, especially that round one. That round one fits just about most stamps. And here's one of the larger ones. And you can see I'm just inking up just the edge of it. This is the 3 bare trees. I love doing Christmas cards with this stamp. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous stamp to do Stampscapes with. And there you have, you know, a little bit more in the foreground there. And now we're going to switch over to Blackjack. You can see I'm starting to now bring out some of the darker shades. Blackjack is a pretty deep shade of gray, and it's such a beautiful color, such a beautiful color. I love this color so much. I actually use it a lot in place of black when I'm doing traditional stamping on cards, you know, not necessarily just scenic cards. But you can see that it's really starting to take this scene a little deeper now. We're really getting that depth and that darkness that we're looking for, which is what you expect, you know, when you're in the forest and then, you know, you have all that fog kind of in the mist in the background. And so we're going to add a little bit more to our scene. I've got Over Coffee, which is actually a lighter shade of brown by Catherine Pooler, and kind of stamping that in between the trees there. You can notice I'm masking off just so that it's really kind of getting into the background there. And don't want to overdo it with that. I'm going to add a little to the foreground, although you're not really going to see that. It's just giving a little bit more texture to the scene. And finally, we're going to work in a little bit of black. Now, Memento Black is a really deep shade. I love to stamp with Memento, the black right there. But if you really truly want a deep, deep, deep black, soot black is too light. I have used it a lot in scenic cards, but if you want a deep black, you got to go with Catherine Pooler Midnight Ink. And I'm going to use it towards the end. It's an archival ink for when we frame the card, because that is truly one of the deepest blacks that I've really found on the market. It's a great, great ink. It does stain your stamps when you stamp with it, but it's great to do if you want something really, really dark. That's great. It's a great ink. But again, it's archival ink, whereas Memento, this right here is Tuxedo Black, is dye. But you can see how that completely altered that scene right there. It really took it to a whole different place once we added the darker shades. The biggest mistake that I find that people make is not taking a scene dark enough. Now, to add contrast, we're going to do our light beams right here. And you can see here I'm using pigment ink. This is actually Unicorn by Hero Arts. This is Hero Hues ink. And pigment ink is a sticky ink. It's an ink that you would use to emboss with. You can do it with lots of different other things. It sits on top of the paper and it takes quite a bit to dry. The thing that's really interesting when you're using it on glossy paper is, you know, don't worry if you make a mistake because you can rub it right off. It's very, very forgiving. Now notice that I am not crossing over those left two tree trunks because remember, I want the light to be coming from behind them. So it's crossing over the other four, but it's going to stay behind those other two. And then we're going to come back and we're going to actually add the beam part in between those two afterward. And right here, you know, I didn't really like what it was doing at the bottom, so I just took my finger and just kind of tapped a little bit. Just like I said, it's very forgiving. So just kind of, I didn't want it to, you know, have, I think I had a little bit of the look from the actual tool there as I was tapping, and I just wanted to kind of feather it out a little bit, so I used my finger to do that. But see how it kind of sits on top of the stamped images? Now, you don't necessarily need to leave that white space, but you know, for me, I felt that it kind of brought a little bit more realism to the scene, so I wanted to add it to it. So I'm taking a Q-tip right there. That's just a regular Q-tip, just kind of loosening it a little bit, and we're going to add a little bit more concentration. You can see that I'm using a piece of copy paper there just to kind of help guide where my you know, sun rays are. And it's okay if they have a little bit more of a straight line. You know, I didn't want it to be too much of a straight line. It's kind of hard to avoid it having that hard line there, just because you're kind of working on that and tapping, and I'm also using the Q-tip at the same time. Right now I'm working on those in-between rays that I was talking about, you know, in between the trees, just making sure that those kind of pop a little bit. I probably could have brought my gray in a little bit more, but that's okay. 2020 hindsight, right? Next time. I really, because after this card is just sitting here on my desk and it really does lighten up, so I do encourage you to go a little bit darker. You don't want to go too crazy dark because you don't want it to have too much of a contrast, but I didn't have enough. And you can see there I had gotten some on my tree trunk and I was just kind of taking a clean Q-tip and wiping that away. Like I said, very, very forgiving. I did a project, and I'll have to link that at the very end of this video. I'll have to link to the Harry Potter video that I did, because I used white pigment ink in that scene as well to kind of translate you know, the spell that Harry did in the forest where he created the Patronus, and you have this big glow of light around a buck. And I used the same concept here using the pigment ink. I just did it in a circular swirl motion around that stamp versus doing the light beams right here. This was such a cool look. I love the way this card turned out. It's very easy to do. It's very forgiving technique. You just want to kind of remember where your light source is. Remember, see, I have that X over to the left. Notice that there is an X and a dot right in the center. Every time I line up this piece of copy paper, I make sure to align it to the dot. See right here, lining it to there and then moving my kind of paper up and down. And that really helps to kind of give it a little bit more of a realistic view as far as rays, kind of emanating from that one spot, and that is the light source. And it's really starting to take shape here. Just going to continue to do this, and I'll speed this up a little bit for you. So now that we have our rays kind of set, we're just going to add a little bit of finishing touch here, and then we're going to deepen a little bit of the scene as well. You know, once you bring a little bit more light in there, you kind of have a better idea of where you need a little bit more dark, and you don't really see that until you have that contrast. So just kind of adding a little bit more depth to those two trees that are kind of in the shadow, as well as going to add a little bit more to the ground. And for that, I'm going to also need to create a frame around my card. And this is going to actually pull the viewer into the scene. And this is something I do in all of my scenic stamping. And there's no better ink than Catherine Pooler Midnight. I love this ink for this. It's so deep, so deep. And it is an archival ink, so it's not a dye ink. So we're going to go around the entire card here, just creating a frame. Now on the edges here, I'm just ever so lightly, and I cannot stress that enough, really lightly tapping. And I never really have the front of my tool onto the card. I always have whatever I'm tapping is off the project, and that helps to give that lighter feel to it. Because I'm using the archival ink and it doesn't dry immediately, it stays a little bit wet. That's why I'm using the copy paper as I rotate this, because I don't want to be touching the midnight and then all of a sudden get black in the middle of my scene. How many of you have done that? I know I have. So that's where the copy paper comes in. But you can see really, really light touch. Now I left that kind of not quite as sped up, and then I'm going to really speed up the rest because you just saw me, quite honestly, do two sides and a corner. So now we're just going to make sure that the rest of the project looks the same, just really kind of deepening those corners, kind of creating that vignette, pulling the viewer into the scene. And so important in scenic stamping, in my view, because it is one of those finishing touches, like our next step. Our next step is actually to bring a little bit more light into the project. And we're going to do that by using a white gel pen. You can use bleed proof white and a paintbrush. You can do all sorts of things, but you need white that's actually going to sit on top of your project. You don't want it to bleed into the project. So I'm just using a very, very small, this is actually a thin gel pen. I didn't want my dots to be too big, so I have a rather small sized gel pen here. Just want to make sure that it's working well. And we're going to bring in a little bit of light and just very, very small little dots here. Just, again, you did all that great shading on the right side. So you're not really going to be putting a whole lot of light on the right side. You're going to now concentrate a little bit more on the left side, which is where the light source is coming from. It wouldn't translate if you did it all over the darkness that you had created in the scene. And this really is truly one of the final steps, is adding this little bit of highlighting. And you can add a little bit to your sunbeams where they kind of hit your trees, and that helps to just kind of blend it into the scene a little bit, kind of diffuse it a little bit, make it look a little bit more realistic. I definitely have it going on within the actual beam itself, as well as in a couple different other areas. You want to make sure to hit the ground, and I'm just using simple little dots. You can use lines as well. I think that dots have a tendency to look a little bit more natural than lines. So for me, that works. When I first started, I started to do lines, and it really, looking back at those projects, it doesn't look as natural. So just kind of keep it a little random and kind of disperse throughout your project. And this really helps to take your project to a different level. Again, you're providing that contrast. You can't have dark without light. You need them both. So this kind of helps bring a little bit of realism. This is just kind of the sun bouncing off those lighter areas on the bark, as well as on the ground, on the twigs, and on the ground itself. So we're really starting to kind of come to the end here. We've got a lot of little white highlights there. I'm just adding a little bit, various spots. I add a little tiny bit to my darker trees just to give, again, you can't have dark without light. Not a whole lot. I've probably added a total of 5 dots between both trunks. But it just kind of gives a little bit more. Now to finish the card, this is going to go super fast. I'm embossing happy or birthday wishes to the very bottom right corner. This card measures 5 inches by 7 inches. So my scene is about 6.5, maybe just a little shy of that, 6 3/8 by 4 and just under 7/8. Just going to glue this down because It is a rather large piece. It's also glossy paper. Just getting that down. I've got, remember, you know, we're using pigment ink with the gel pen, so, you know, using a piece of paper to, don't want to touch it, don't want to smear things, rubbing off that excess little anti-static there. And so here are some transitional pieces for you, as well as some close-ups. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this project. I love the way this project turned out. Have fun with the blog hop. Be sure to head on over to my blog to check out all the links to all my friends and all the amazing things that they've created. Thank you to our sponsors. We have some amazing prizes. Make sure you're leaving comments all along the blog hop. If you love this project, Kevin from Stampscapes has donated 2 nature packs, so definitely leave those comments and definitely give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And I'm sure there might be a couple videos somewhere along the hop too, so, and come back tomorrow and the next day. I am back on day 3 with another project. I'm gonna do a little bit of mixed media and we're gonna have some fun there. So I'll see you then. Bye bye.